Hello and welcome back to the From My Prospective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football landscape that could change the football landscape in the very near future. So as per usual, we've got 10 predictions of the 10 games I see most prominent, maybe at least the 10 that I feel most confident saying something about, or at least predicting something towards it, and that definitely includes Tennessee versus Georgia, which will actually be the leadoff of this video, so make sure you stick around at least to see that much. But before we jump into any of it, make sure to hit subscribe. It helps me out a ton. I'm just trying to grow the channel. So like I said, we'll start off with Tennessee versus Georgia, the massive collision that we're in for this weekend between 1 and 2, these two powerhouse teams, these dominant forces that we've seen run amok through college football this season. Georgia less so than Tennessee. You know, we've seen Tennessee really jump up levels each and every step of the way. I've been saying that they're tearing up, they're leveling up, they're finding that next gear again and again and again. Georgia's going to be the toughest team they face this year, and that does include Alabama. I think Tennessee levels up again. I think they beat the Bulldogs, remain undefeated, and then we're in for a real interesting situation come college football playoff time and come SEC championship time. I just released an episode, if you're a consistent viewer of this show, that I said Tennessee was going to be the SEC conference champion. That doesn't happen without this win. I'm not going out here and saying Georgia is going to lose one of their other games, or I guess it would have to be 2 of their other games for Tennessee to get over them while Georgia beats Tennessee. That's not the math we're doing here. This is simply Tennessee beats Georgia, which I do believe is going to happen. Like I said, they keep getting better. They've been this great team since the start of the season, but now they have become an elite team. Their offense is one of, if not the best offense in the country. Even though Ohio State puts up some absurd numbers, Tennessee has gone toe-to-toe with them. I would argue that Tennessee's running game has been better. Jalen Hyatt has been instrumental in how this team operates, and I think Hendon Hooker's playing better football than C.J. Stroud is right now. That's what we're looking at with Tennessee. But Georgia, you can never count them out. Their defense is always great. Their offense looks all right this year. Stetson Bennett, I'm still not just the biggest believer in, but they're finding success. They haven't lost a game yet. That's obviously not because they only have one side of the ball. The offense can compete. We know that much. They don't strike me, though, as a team that really feels ready to go back-to-back as far as championships go, college football-wise. Tennessee doesn't strike me as a team that's really bothered by that number by their name, whether that be too high or too low. They've just, even though they've shot up the board and really become the staple of college football this year, it hasn't really seemed like they faced any of those exterior distractions, which is a huge plus, especially when you look at a team that does not typically have this level of success. In the end, the rules are engineered to favor offenses in college football. That much is undisputed. You get a lot more flags towards a defense than you do in offense. Georgia's defense, it's among the best in the country, but facing something like Tennessee where they just go all out all the time, you're never going to have the highest level of success. Like, this will never be the best game Georgia plays on defense strictly because of how good Tennessee's offense is. I do think it's going to be one of their sloppiest wins of the season, talking about Tennessee here. I think they're going to have to really get in the mud to win this one. I think they're going to have to pull out a lot of strength and might and find their way through what could be a very difficult situation for them. I do think they're going to beat Georgia and continue this absolutely absurd run that we've seen from the Volunteers. Now, I would not be wearing this shirt. I'm not an Oklahoma State fan. I wear different shirts from different teams all the time. I'm coming off of Wyoming. Did I have the UCF one on last time? Arkansas State. I just like to wear different shirts, but this one does apply because they are my second team this week that I want to talk about. After an absolutely embarrassing display last week, I think they're going to take their frustrations out, get back in the win column. I don't see Oklahoma State being a 3-loss team at this point in the year. I'm even going to run the footage of how bad that was against Kansas State because I need you to realize fully how tough that was to watch as a team that I thought was going to be very, very good. I still think is very, very good. But when you looked at the post-game press conference, Coach Mike Gundy came out and said something along the lines of he made a big mistake during practices, yada, yada, so on and so forth. He's not going to make that mistake again. I'll tell you that for free. The players are going to be angry. They're going to feel embarrassed. They're going to need to prove that they are still this high-level football team. Kansas, they're just trying to grab on to anything as they fall off the side of the cliff. They're really not what we saw from earlier in the season. Losing Jalen Daniels has been horrible for them. They're now a 3-loss team. The steam coming off of Lance Leipold is slowly getting colder and colder. I'm questioning if he's still a candidate for some of these high up jobs. They're not the streaking giant that we saw earlier this year. It feels like a team who's going to be furious and needs something so bad to just say, look, Kansas State came out there and flatlined us, but we're going to have to come back out here and show them that that was a one-time thing. Kansas doesn't feel like they've got that in the tank. If it was in Stillwater, I'd double dip here and make them my crush game, which if you're new to the channel, which there's every likelihood you are because of the size of that game that I talked about first. My crush game is where I project somebody crushes somebody, which entails that the line is within 10, but I do think it finishes larger than a 2-score difference. So you're looking at anything above 16 points. I do think that that's what the result is. If this game was in Stillwater, that's the direction I would be leaning. Now we make a trip back to the SEC because what realistically is the second largest game of this slate that we're coming up on is Alabama versus LSU. I think LSU got a lot of inflation from being featured so highly on the poll. They're number 10 coming into this game. I think Alabama absolutely decimates them because I don't like what I've seen from LSU, and I have a lot of issues believing that the team that we're seeing on the field is the same team from what we saw earlier in the year. And maybe I have some LSU bias here because, like I said, the genetic makeup of their team is talented. It doesn't have a whole lot of cohesion. They've improved leaps and bounds over the past few weeks. I'm well aware of that. But look at Brian Kelly's, record against Alabama and how much he struggles against teams like that. I don't know that in his first year he's going to have the cohesion and talent all put together to go up against these teams. And I'm going against the logic here. I'm well aware of it. When you look at Bama's schedule, Neyland Stadium, the DKR Memorial, they were poison for them. They were poison for the Tide. They struggled real hard whenever they had to go on the road in these tough environments. Death Valley, absolutely in the same tier of those stadiums, especially when they're good. Right now, it does appear they're good, at least record-wise they're good. They wouldn't be number 10 if they weren't good on paper, but I don't care. I simply do not care all that much about that situation. I refuse to believe that what we're seeing from LSU has magically fixed itself. They love beating Ole Miss. Ole Miss hates playing LSU. They beat Florida, who is also not very good. They got embarrassed by Tennessee in Death Valley, a team Bama was a field goal away from beating, or at least taking them to overtime. So there's a lot of things here that would suggest maybe LSU has a little bit of an edge and, maybe Bama's not very fitted for what they're about to walk into. I'm out. I'm not believing it. I'm not buying into this smoke. I'm out on Brian Kelly. I do not particularly think he is this world-beating head coach. I do think he can go out down there and win an LSU. I'm not saying that he won't, but I don't see him as this great, leader of men. That's not what I've seen from him at Notre Dame, at Cincinnati, especially not at LSU. I would like to see them prove me wrong. I want to see that parity. LSU is an elite brand to have, especially around the SEC, somebody who is very good to be great. It holds a lot more weight if LSU is good than if Missouri is. Then that's the simple fact of it, just based on fan base and everything. But I've got to go Alabama, and I think that they have a really convincing victory over the Tigers. The next game I want to look at, we're going back and forth. We went SEC, Big 12, SEC, going back to the Big 12 now. We've got Kansas State and Texas. That line is set at -3 in Texas's favor. Kansas State's going to come into this game and make it apparent how stupid odds makers can be at times. Kansas State rolling off of a giant victory, like I was just talking about with Oklahoma State, and Texas has not been the same Texas team. I don't understand how you can watch the Wildcats do that to the Cowboys and then make them the underdogs at home to Texas. And that line's moved. Whenever I was initially writing these notes the night prior to this release, Texas was -2.5. It's gone up a half a point, which I know isn't just the most insane thing, but I don't care about Texas's bye week. They had to crawl through glass to beat Iowa State. They lost to Oklahoma State and allowed 41 points. The novelty of the Red River blow-off has worn off on me full force. I'm not here for whatever is happening with this line. The reality is it just hasn't sunk in with a lot of bettors. I think that Quinn Ewers being good every once in a while is really helping surge this. Texas is a huge fan base. They know they can get people to buy in on Texas. And maybe that doesn't make them look stupid. Maybe that's kind of what they're going for here. I'm sure that is what they're going for here. But I think it's almost free money for anybody voting in Kansas State's favor here, either on the line or money line. I would take money line pretty comfortably, and I don't know what the over-under set, so I'm not going to talk about that one. Kansas State's defense ranks number 11th in the country. That's the second best defense that Texas has played this year. Iowa State does rank higher. Iowa State allowed 24 and scored 21, and you are out of your mind if you don't think Kansas State is scoring a lot more than 21 points. Kansas State's defense, pretty similar to Iowa State's as far as being able to stop what you're putting out on the field. Kansas State's offense, a whole different world. Get ready for it because they are monsters. Even Adrian Martinez's backup looked phenomenal last week. They've got depth, they've got guys, and they're going to go in there and beat Texas. They've also, Texas talking about here, they've racked up numbers against the easy streak of their schedule. They close out K-State, TCU, Kansas, Baylor. Now, I don't think that's the toughest run that you could form in the Big 12 by any means, but, those are four pretty decent teams. I'm losing steam on Kansas, so it kind of is turning into three, but don't ever sleep on the Baylor Bears or Dave Aranda. They're always capable of, surprising you. I think the Wildcats are probably going to start what might end up being a 1-3 run for the Longhorns to close out the year. And while that might seem absurd and, they're ranked right now and everything's kind of going their way as far as public opinion, I'm not of that group. I don't see the Longhorns being all that successful right now. I think they got a lot of good building blocks. I don't think it's coming this season. So what could realistically be a top 3 game, I've kind of moved it down the pecking order because I wanted to take this first block up with Big 12 and the SEC because I found it the most interesting this year. We're now going to the ACC with Clemson. They're playing what could be a sneaky trap game, if you want to call Notre Dame a trap team. This has danger written all over it, but I do think Clemson comes out here and gets another one of those signature gritty wins that we've seen time and time again this year, and they're going to get it over the Fighting Irish. Look away if you hate them, but the Fighting Irish, they fought their way back to being a legit win and a real issue each and every week. I know they've had some embarrassing showings, but they just clowned Syracuse. They started the BYU downfall. They're the only team to beat UNC. They've scored 40 in both of their last 2 games. Things are clicking. Drew Pine's out there making things work. Tommy Rees has got that offense figured out. Marcus Freeman looks like he's back on top of the mountain as far as getting the Fighting Irish faithful back on his side. And guess what? Clemson, they fought better teams, and they've escaped by the skin of their teeth. Even including that Syracuse team. DJU's been far from perfect, but he's been fine. He's made things happen whenever he needs to. I get that they had to pull him in that last game against Syracuse, and Kate Klubnik came in, but their defense has been winning games. You look at the offense, they've got a lot of talented pieces. Whichever quarterback they roll out, Will Shipley, but look at that front 7 with Brian Bresee and Miles Murphy and Trenton Simpson and all these just monsters. Their defense is the real winner here, and I'm calling them a submarine team. And if you don't get that, it's because they're built for deep waters. They love to go just into the murky abyss and somehow emerge with all their limbs intact and with a win. They've collected plenty of skulls to this point. I don't think they're going to stop now. Notre Dame, they're 2 for 2 when games finish within 1 score. They've got wins against Cal and BYU, losses to Marshall and Stanford. Clemson's 3-0 in that, 4-0 if you widen that gap to 10 or less because they did beat Wake Forest by 10 points. Overall, I just think that Clemson is a team that a lot of people are struggling to buy into right now because they win a lot of close games. Notre Dame is absolutely a team that could push another close game on them. They just don't have that same level of finishing power that Clemson does to hang on to this game. So I go in favor of the Tigers there. And I had mentioned that they beat Wake Forest by 10. And funny enough, we're coming back up on the Demon Deacons. They are featuring in my next prediction. They're another one of those teams that it looked hilariously bad, that final score against Louisville. I think they bounce back here, and I think they get a win, and kind of remind people how dangerous that offense can be whenever it's not having these freakish incidents like we saw last week. Now, you can get on to me all you want if you think this is dumb, but I am going under the assumption that Sam Hartman won't just keep giving the ball to the defense like it's candy on Halloween. Maybe I'm wrong for doing that, but what we saw against Louisville will look more like an anomaly to me, look more like he got in his own head to me than it did anything else. Whenever he's clicking and he's rolling, he is a very, very good quarterback, and don't you ever forget it. It was also their fewest points scored all year. 31 was the previous record, which is absurd to me. Prior to that game, 31 points was the lowest they had gone, and look at who they're lined up against. They're playing NC State, and without Devin Leary, they don't have their guy, their leader, their difference maker, if you will. And we've seen some struggles out of that. Even though MJ Morris looked really good in that last game, they've gone back and forth between him and the other kid that I'm forgetting the name of. Maybe Morris gets that full start and they really give him the reins, but the issue is he's going to have to keep up with the 13th best offense in scoring in the country, and that's a really tough task for a dude who was not supposed to start any football games this year. That's a very impossible ask for a team that doesn't look very cohesive right now and is going into deep waters and situations that they probably weren't supposed to, especially with Devin Leary being there. So I find it a fairly, I don't want to say easy, because NC State is still a very talented team, but I find it easier than it would be by a mile if Devin Leary was here to predict this game. Okay, so both of those two teams, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they are ranked. We've got a one-ranking team, but I believe the two teams within this game are going to flip the position on that. I think Washington's going to go play Oregon State, and they're just going to take their number. Simply put, I'm more impressed with Washington this year. Michael Penix Jr. has been a legitimate Heisman potential guy. If it wasn't for Hendon Hooker and C.J. Stroud's semi-inflated numbers, I would say Michael Penix would be a top 5, top 3 guy. But right now it's a little bit harder to make a case for him, especially when you've got two quarterbacks doing like that, and Drake May's been awesome, and obviously you've got a bunch of different dudes that could factor in there, but it's really just a two-horse race right now. Overall, I do think Washington is a really good team, led by Michael Penix Jr., and I don't know that I can really say the same about Oregon State. Is the 46th best defense going to be good enough to stop the 10th best offense? That's Oregon State's defense and the Huskies' offense. Better yet, can the 44th best offense put up enough success against the 77th best defense to keep up with that other matchup? I'm inclined to believe no. While the defense for Washington has not been great, I'll concede that in a heartbeat, Oregon State's offense isn't in those top 2 or 3 tiers of college football this year. I don't love what you're seeing on paper from this game. The quarterback turmoil for Oregon State's an easy attack point. They've really struggled to figure out who's going to be their quarterback. They're really leaned in on their running game, but good news for Washington, they allow roughly 110 yards a night in the dirt. That's 21st best in the nation. So even though their defense is, almost in that, or they're in that 80 range, their rushing attack has been the focal point, and you don't really have to worry about the fact that Oregon State's quarterback might chew you up, because their quarterbacks haven't really been chewing anybody up. So the puzzle pieces fit in so well for Washington winning here, and they've got a claim to a ranking if this one works. They've got the same record as Oregon State rolling into it. They'll only have 2 losses. There's a lot of interest here. Personally, I lean towards the Huskies coming out on top. Now, I almost wore my Nebraska shirt here because I had them coming up as well, but since Oklahoma State was higher up, I did kind of go in this direction. You'll probably see the Nebraska shirt on the next episode we do of this, but I've got Nebraska's game as one of my focal points because against Minnesota, I do think they're going to cover what is currently a 14-point line, I believe. That might be a little bit off. Lines might have shifted by the time this comes out, but I do think Nebraska has what it takes to cover that gap. I think Minnesota got a pretty good boost here because of that game against Rutgers that they're coming off of. But they've got a real shaky situation beyond that. They're not too dissimilar from Nebraska when you really get down to the brass tacks of it. They had bad showings against Penn State and Illinois, very good defenses, ranked teams, I get that. They also had a pretty poor showing against Purdue. That's the alarming one there. Nebraska also lost a lot of momentum. You know, they were riding high off that Mickey Joseph plant in there, but they've got similar losses, Illinois and Purdue, but they had a better showing against Purdue, even though it was a worse showing against Rutgers. So if you're just matching common opponents to this point, you're kind of level as far as I'm concerned as to what you're looking at, and Minnesota's been a significantly better team at home. This one's in Lincoln. That's a big thing to remember. The line is set at 16, so never mind. It might have moved. I think maybe I saw it earlier that it was 14 and it's moved to 16, something along those lines. I digress. Minnesota is the favorite here. That's just a little bit larger than I'm comfortable with. I think the Huskers are not a horrible team. I don't think Minnesota is a great team. You know, it's one of those situations where I don't think the tier separation is all that large. You give Nebraska home field advantage. Minnesota struggles when they have to travel. Feels decent. I'm not predicting a Nebraska win. Obviously, if they win, that means they covered, which would make this prediction right. But I do think it finishes within that wider margin that we're looking at. Okay, so the last episode I released, we had predicted all of the conference championship winners from Power 5 and Group of 5. And I wore my UCF shirt. I predicted UCF was going to win that. And while I do still believe that's true, obviously, that just came out a couple days ago, be prepared for Memphis to give them a real test during this game, even though Memphis is, on paper, a decently worse team than the Golden Knights are. This really boils down to Memphis being a different team entirely when they're at home. When they're at Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium, they're 3-1 and they've outscored opponents 144 to 1-2. On the road, they're 1-3. So they get the bulk of their success whenever they've got the home crowd at their back. UCF's one loss on the road this year was a pretty ugly one. Granted, it was to an East Carolina team who is better than Memphis. I think we can all agree on that. I still like UCF to win. I think it'll finish closer than you would assume with these two's momentums and records and talent. I think that you'll probably see within a one-score game here, but I'm taking the Golden Knights to survive the scare. Just barely, though. I think Memphis gives them a run. And then quickly, the last prediction I've got here is my crush one. I've got Kentucky crushing Missouri. The real explanation here, I know Kentucky's blood has run a bit cold lately, but look at what they've trudged through. Tennessee, Mississippi State, South Carolina, when they got hot, Ole Miss, you're looking at two ranked teams, an offense that's hard to combat, and then obviously South Carolina, which had quite a bit of momentum behind them. This also screams Will Levis potential praise game, while it's in reality, Chris Rodriguez is the key there because he's secretly one of the better running backs in the country, even though he doesn't get enough love in that category. I like Coach Drinkwitz. I think he's got his guys fired up. I think that's ended up being a sneaky good hire for Missouri. I just don't think that they're all that great of a team yet, and I think they caught Georgia sleeping at the wheel. Still didn't pull the trigger there. Florida shoots themselves in the foot on a weekly basis. South Carolina, they've always been a sheep dressed as a wolf. Like, it's always been that Spencer Rattler is not the QB we thought he was, that Shane Beamer might not be the best coach that they could have hired in that cycle. It all feels just super inflated to me, so give me the Wildcats to go out there and expose that. That line, again, was set at -2, which means that they're going to have a 14-point curve, Kentucky will, in order to fulfill this prediction. So obviously we'll have to wait and see. But what do you think about those predictions? Do you disagree? Do you agree? What are you thinking about them? Are you a big Georgia believer in this game? Do you think Tennessee's luck's coming to an end? I'd love to hear all of it. Make sure to leave it in the comments. I'll even put my Twitter in the description if you're interested in chirping at me there. But for now, that is episode 46 of the From My Perspective podcast. And as always, I'll see you next time.